Right, hello. I'll just make sure I've got the slides in the right place. Okay, that looks like me. All right, I hope everybody's had their lunch and they're not settling in for a sleep this afternoon. I'm going to try and keep you awake, but I can't promise that I will. But I'll give it my best shot. So I want to talk about a few things today, but actually I'm going to start off with an analogy. So I want to just ask you, put your hands up if you have a toolbox at home. Okay, I think everybody, keep your hands up please. This is also a partial exercise to get you a bit fitter after your lunchtime activities. All right, now keep your hand up if you've bought a new tool in the last, let's say, 3 months. There's a few hands, that's good, okay, all right. Keep your hand up if that tool is now the only tool you use. Great, the reason for the analogy is that I look at RPA and I think to myself that it's a tool. And it's not the only tool you'll ever need. And it's also not the tool that replaces all other tools. It's a tool which you can add to your toolbox. And with the right situation, you bring it out. But don't use RPA in the wrong situation. Neither should you use a different tool than RPA when it's crying out for RPA. So that's part of the analogy. And I'm pleased to see that people corresponded to what I was hoping for. Because that would have gone disastrously wrong if everybody kept their hands up all the way to the end. So I'm going to talk about a journey to date at St John of God Healthcare. I'm going to talk about managing the digital workforce, growing the digital workforce, considerations when growing, and how to do it successfully. And I think what you'll find is that I'm asking some questions, and they might sound like they're rhetorical, but they're actually not rhetorical. I would like to get some conversation around this, whether or not people feel brave enough to throw it back at me while I'm stood up here. That's up to you guys to decide, or whether we do it through Q&A or through informal discussion afterwards. But the key thing is conversation's valuable for me as well. I don't pretend to be an expert. I've been on this journey for 2.5 years. And if I thought about myself as a child, I'm 2.5 years old. So I don't know much. And I'm quite reliant still upon other people to help me to figure out how the world works around me. And so I invite the conversation because there are a lot of questions that we're facing at the moment that we don't have all the answers to. We might have a response, but we don't necessarily have the best answer. So I am curious about how other people are finding the journey as they progress. So I'll get into it with some stats. So simple before and after, keep this nice and straightforward. If I look at what we looked like before we had automation, there were 40 caregivers. That's our term for an employee. So caregiver means that we always think that we're giving care to our patients, but we also think we're giving care to each other as employees, because that's the kind of organisation that we express ourselves as. So performing AR, accounts receivable, AP, accounts payable, and management accounting. So all squarely within the finance domain. And this is the addressable area. So this isn't everybody that works in those teams. This is just the addressable area where we have implemented some automation. And what we have now, a couple of years later on down the track, is we've got 9 digital workers. I don't like calling them bots. I don't like really calling them like human names, because I think that anthropomorphizes something which is a long way from being human, but I don't mind the concept of digital worker. So I've used that in this particular occasion, and it's well worn in the industry, I think. And without getting into the nuts and bolts and finances or anything like that, or FTE reductions, I just thought it would be easier to just measure it in the same way that I've seen a lot of presentations, which is how much hours do you give back to the business? And I do think about this particularly more now than I ever have done, which is the job for me, I think, and maybe the job for you guys if you're doing automation in your organisation, is to give time back to the business and give time back to managers to decide what they want to do with it. If they want to put it into higher quality service, that's a management decision. If they want to make redundancies, that's a management decision. If they want to see people relocate from a low-skilled job into a higher-skilled job, that's a management decision. And it's an organisational question. It's not necessarily a question for automation to handle, though inevitably the two do get tied together once you start on an automation journey. So that's just my sort of tuppence worth. Obviously, there's a far richer story below this, and I won't go into huge amounts of detail, but what I will do is just go back in time to what we thought RPA would be before we actually had RPA. So this is kind of business case point, and to give you time, this is around about October, November 2017. So we thought that RPA will reduce costs. So finance function, we like to think about reducing costs. It's not the only thing we think about, but we certainly do want to reduce costs where we can. We also wanted to think about taking more control of IT, using technology to our advantage, To some extent, the stereotypical view existed. At the time, IT's slow, takes a long time to get anything done. Yes, we can use a new application. Yes, we can have an API. You can have that in 18 months, sir. We need it quicker. We want it faster. So some of this was driven by the feeling that RPA was able to scratch that itch quicker than alternative processes. So that was part of what we were interested in. And we wanted to remove mundane work. We did actually want to make people's jobs more interesting, liberating them for higher value-added tasks. And I think we all probably think like that some of the time, but as I was mowing the lawn the other day outside my house, I was thinking, sometimes I actually do like to do mundane, boring crap. Not because it's fun to do it, but just because I can switch off and I can think about something else. So it's not a given that people will flock to that idea, but that's certainly the idea we had in our minds when we embarked. So now it's 2 and a bit years later, and what are the things that we can observe? Well, we actually did eliminate more cost perhaps than we expected, probably in slightly different places than we expected, because we had some successes and some failures on the journey, and some over-delivery and some under-delivery. So it was a bit of a mixed experience, which projects often are. We did increase our reliance on technology, and that created a problem for us, because when you've got a team of 40 people and one person goes off sick, it's pretty easy to cope. But if your technology stack falls over, think about the impact of a business where the IT platform goes down for 12 hours. People are suddenly unable to do anything because we're reliant on technology. And as you move towards more automation, obviously you're taking that incremental risk with you. We also got a very close look through audit logs and through output files. Wow, we thought we had standardized processes, because that's how we designed the process maps during the business analysis phase, and that's how we wrote scripts. And then the scripts keep falling over, and you're wondering, why are the scripts falling over? Was it Minefields development resources that got it wrong? And the answer is, no, actually it may have been that we didn't describe the business process adequately, or there's a nuance that actually wasn't understood at the time, because sometimes things change that you don't notice. So the non-uniformity of the business processes was becoming screamingly apparent as we implemented RPA, and it caused some of our problems with trying to close the project out, as we ironed out those wrinkles that appeared. And suboptimality was kind of revealed too, because what we could see now was, instead of that beautiful dream that most finance professionals have, that procure to pay is a 7-step process, and that will be the case because Pareto says 80-20, 80% of the time it will be 7 steps. But actually you discover it's more like 8% of the time that you follow that 7-step process. And then there's 1,500 variations that count for the 92%. So those aren't real numbers, but that just is me trying to make the point about what robotics revealed, because everything that's done is now recorded by the robots, which is an unintended benefit, which is nice because there were some unintended disbenefits as well through our journey. We did introduce a competing or complementing technology. So we did introduce the new tool into the toolbox. But you know what? A lot of people still like spanners or drills or saws because that's their favorite tool, or that's a tool they've used before. And what is this new tool anyway, and how would I use it? If you are actually thinking about tools, then go to Bunnings, because they have workshops on this kind of stuff and they can help you out. But if you're thinking about RPA, this is my lived experience, is that we had a new competing technology, and not everybody wants to use a new tool. I don't remember how many people didn't put up their hand when I said in the last 3 months, have you bought a new tool? I got a feeling it might have been more than 50%. And what that says is, to me, at least in this sample, is that human behaviour is we tend to use the things that we're familiar with, not the things we're not familiar with. And that creates a problem for the adoption of RPA, potentially, or any technology. And it may feel like I'm saying the same thing again, but yes, we did take more control of IT. And then we wondered, oh crap, how are we going to manage this? Because we're not IT people. We don't understand ITIL or certain business process methodologies or SOA or anything like that. So there's a bunch of unknowns that appeared throughout our journey. And then biggest surprise to me, because it just didn't resonate for me when I saw this happen with 20% of the people who are affected by RPA. We've got a new job, we've got a better job for you. We're going to take away some of that mundane stuff. And 80% of people were, yay! And 20% of people were saying, I hate my job. I've got no downtime. I'm running all the time. I never get to jog or even walk. It's harder. My job's not as good as it used to be. So some people have that negative effect, and people are strange. Echo and the Bunnymen said that, I think. I'm not 100% sure. So from my perspective, I just want to wrap up what I think are some of the kind of key things that we learned from our RPA journey. A green bubble means it's a thing that I'd want to repeat, because in your lessons learned, it's not always about chastising yourself and beating yourself up. It's often about thinking, well, what do I want to do again? And so taking a measured risk with new technology paid off for us, and there's more opportunities for us to do that in our organisation. I find it very hard to believe that most organisations don't have an opportunity for RPA. Very hard to believe. But I'm an advocate for it, so maybe I'm unfairly biased towards it. So taking a measured risk is something I'd want to repeat. Using a project methodology was undoubtedly helpful in the sense that it made sure that we went through the right steps in the process, but I'd argue that we didn't do some of the steps as well as we might have done. So I'd use the methodology again. We used Agile, and we changed from waterfall to Agile between business case and execution, and that brought in new risks by going Agile. So it was good to use a project methodology, whichever one we used, and it helped us, and I would repeat it. Grey means mixture of good and bad, and I think that we utilised Mindfield's experience, substantial experience in RPA. We also took some risks with OCR because we were trying to implement ABI Flexi Capture at the time, and it was relatively unknown to both parties. And that brings risk into the implementation, because if you don't have experts in either party, then there's a risk that you fall foul. And we lost a bit of confidence while we were trying to implement OCR. So I think there's things that we did well, which I want to repeat, but then I might change slightly the tack and get some more expertise in a stretched bit of technology that I'm trying to implement. Designing for stability is a grey because I think we did quite a lot to cope with things like internet browsers closing or bank portals thinking you're a cybersecurity threat, kicking you out, timing out your session. We did a bunch of stuff around resilience, and the truth of that is visible when you look at a script that's 970 lines long. It's got that many lines because there's if-then-else loops in there to cope with various different interruptions that occur. But we're now 6 months past close out of the project, and we still have issues almost every day. And is that a script issue? Most often not, because the script does work the next day. Most often it's an environmental factor. And those environmental factors can be the application that you're using, they can be the browser base because you're outside your organisation, and they could be the joins that you've created, because RPA is an orchestration tool. So some of what you're doing is actually you're scripting the parts of the interaction between applications. So sometimes it might be just the way that you've written the script isn't robust enough. So stability has become pretty key for us. We also weren't good at defining our success criteria, because we said if we get the FTE savings, give time back to the business, we've succeeded. But what happens if the people don't think the work's gone? If you can't objectively measure that the work's gone, you're in a difficult spot. And we certainly experienced that phenomenon, because we didn't think, what are we going to use to objectively measure that everybody will agree we will objectively measure at the end of the project that we have succeeded? So that's a big thing that I'd want to do a lot better on my next project. I think we probably spent maybe 5–10% of the project budget on the feasibility stage. I don't want to say it's a spend question, but the fact that we were seeing so many script variations or process variations with the scripts says to me that if we'd done more on feasibility, we would have had a better and more holistic view of the business case. It would have been probably higher cost, but it would have been more realistic, because we did find that we spent more on the project because we were still dealing with issues that we didn't uncover during feasibility. So if you're at the end of feasibility and you're writing a business case and your business tolerance is plus or minus 5% for the project, that's not much contingency if you have got a lot of unknowns. So you either go in with a bunch of unknowns and give yourself a bigger contingency, is my view, or you invest more in feasibility and narrow that. But don't choose the worst of both those options. And change management is something, again, which people sometimes put a dollar value to or a percentage of project budget to. I've heard various figures used, 25 to 40% of project budget should be spent on change management. This is a people change management thing. It's not technology, really. You're changing people's roles. So change management is not about just the tech and about communications and about stage gates and milestones and PSCs. It's about hearts and minds, feelings, understanding where people are at. What vulnerabilities do they have? How do you deal with that? Do you plan ahead for it? I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So the other thing that we move into now is managing the digital workforce, because I've talked about our journey. And good performance before may have been easy to see. Because on the left we had an office, and this isn't our office, by the way, just to protect anybody who's thinking it is. The office on the left is the traditional office, which is filled with human beings. And they're human people, that's right. Yeah. I don't know what other sort of people there are, actually. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for saving me there, Luke. That was very helpful.
Digital people.
Yeah, digital people? Okay. I'm trying to figure out whether this is conversational banter or if it's barracking. It feels like it's banter, so I'm going to let it go. So on the left, you've got an office full of people who are visibly at their PCs. They've got headsets on. They're moving their mice. They look like they might be about to hit their keyboards. Some of them might be wandering around between desks talking to each other. It's very obvious that there's something happening. You might not know that there's anything productive happening. They might be on Facebook. They might be talking to their friends. But visibly, you can see that there's work being carried out. Now, when you move to the alternative scenario, which is that you've got a bunch of digital workers and the team members that were doing those jobs before are doing something else, there's no visible signs. So the question becomes, how do you measure what good performance looks like now? Did you know what it looked like before? Because even though you saw it was busy, did that tell you that you were effective? Did that tell you that people were productive? Maybe, maybe not. But you're certainly faced with a different visual signal. So how is success measured? We have gone through a couple of different things, and naturally we implemented an SLA quite early on in terms of how many records will the bot process on a given day, and the answer is as many of them as we can, or 100%, which may have been setting ourselves up for a bit of failure because it's always difficult to get to 100%. The other things that we thought about probably a little bit before the SLA was whether or not we've achieved the benefits that were stated in the business case for the costs that were required to deliver those benefits. And inevitably, I get questions occasionally from, yeah, I know we've got RPA, but how well are the bots utilised? And that's a serious question, and it deserves a serious answer. But is that the only measure of success? I'm not sure it is. I think there's probably a mixture of things, and it differs for everybody. We've got a mixture of all those things. And I don't, again, profess to have an answer here. This is just some of the thought processes and questions that have come up on our journey. I talked a bit about stability and reliability earlier on. The question is, how automated is your automation? And this comes back, I think, to change management. I've experienced the phenomenon, and maybe you guys have if you've got RPA as well, where you say, hi, I'm the RPA manager. I manage our robotic process automation portfolio. And people say, where's your bot? Where is your bot? Have you brought it with you? It's not a physical thing, obviously. So you have to remember that people don't necessarily know what RPA is. And when people hear automation, they also say, so automation means automation, right? Automation all the time. Never needs to be touched. Set and forget. Once you've got these things in place, don't need any humans around. Is that true? I'm not sure it really is. And I'm not sure it was before you had humans either, but humans are remarkably adaptable, solving problems. Any Scott Adams fans here recognise Pointy Head Boss and Dilbert, and I think most managers would probably behave somewhat similarly to Pointy Head Boss in this situation. If I was experiencing problems with my internet browser or my PC, went into non-responsive state, or an application refused my login details, my manager would get pretty tired if I came up to see them and said, hey, I've got a problem with this. And they go, can you go and solve it yourself? And most of the time humans do, right? But bots don't. When they fail, they just fail. They don't have any remediation capabilities. They're not cognitive. So it's a different mindset around automation. It's a very different change to just swapping out people for automated software. So I think it's important to think about training. And as you transition between humans and an RPA or hybrid, just think about how people are. People actually ask for training. People signal that they need training to you. And sometimes we as managers or leaders or trainers offer training to people to help them in their jobs. But with RPA, it's one way. RPA does not ask for training, doesn't know what training it needs. So as a manager, the training burden falls on you if you're managing bots to think through what are the training needs for my bots. So I've got an application upgrade coming up in the next 6 months. Westpac, our bank, has just changed its URL or its UI at the splashdown page. I have to think through those things. I have to be ahead of them, otherwise the scripts are just going to fail on the day that that change gets implemented. somebody say something? No? Oh, yeah, okay, thank you. I've got about another 66 slides to go, so that's what it says on here, but I don't think that's right. I think I'm on my last 3 or 4 slides. So how will you manage disruptions? I talked about business continuity planning, so you notice I'm going to pick up my pace a little bit. So individual workers versus an automated collective. So I talked about the situation where somebody's off sick, if there's a team of 40, and I talked about a network being down. What if there's a fire drill in this human situation on the left? Everybody puts down pens and walks out into the rostered area, go and finds the place where they assemble. What happens if your building's not operational accessible? Well, those are all things that interrupt human work. But with automation, fire drill doesn't much matter to a robot. Software's going to keep working. Building not being accessible, again, doesn't matter. But what about if one of the VMs is off sick? And by that I mean it doesn't show up for work or it encounters an Internet Explorer issue. But what happens if the whole farm is off because an application's died or there's a network failure? So business continuity planning is now different, and it has to be thought of as different because an interruption is going to have a different response to what response you would have applied when you had humans in your workforce. And I think it's important when you implement any new technology or any change into the workplace, you've got to think about what you purposefully brought in or what you changed purposefully and what actually changed that you didn't notice. So the unexpected changes that occur above this little guy's head as he releases one fly but finds or doesn't even notice that there's another 6 flies that fly in above his head. So you've got to be very careful as you introduce the new technology. And my view is that, for us at least, not being able to answer some of these questions over the time period we've been using RPA has actually given some doubts and made it difficult for RPA to grow in our organisation. People are a bit nervous about it because it's still an unknown and there's a lot of risk associated with it. So if you don't deal with those risks, if you don't sort of learn from them and don't address them, then I think you're just setting yourself up to kind of continually feel frustrated with whatever ambitions you might have. So a little bit just about the growth. How do you get into growth? And for your organisation, if it looked like this, 5 different sort of functions within the executive branch, and you started in finance, you might want to go deeper into finance. So you might only have 60% penetration in your AP team. You might want to go to 75 or 80. You might want to go across into HR and start doing payroll processing for them. You might want to go up the value chain and actually start introducing some machine learning or some natural language processing and move more towards intelligent automation than just RPA. Or you might ask your executives to sponsor it. So I guess the question I have in my head, and you guys might all face this as well, is where are you in this? Where are you coming from? What can you leverage? And are you mindful of how you're going to be sensitive to the situation you've got in your organisation? You'll need to think about, if you're trying to grow out from the core, you'll need to think about who your detractors and your promoters are for RPA. And again, we'll come back to answering some of those questions from the previous slides. These are the Luddites, the picture that I'm showing right now. They were early 19th century textile workers who basically formed a society and smashed machinery. The machinery was an automated loom, so textile workers were worried about their jobs. This isn't very much different to what we will experience with RPA and have been experiencing with RPA. People will feel frightened by the technology coming in to steal their jobs. And of course, some of the hype that's been in the marketplace will also antagonise that feeling anyway. And I dare say that for all of us, in any change environment, we're all familiar with the change dilemma on the right-hand side. So it probably speaks for itself. So I do think RPA is a new tool. It's not a silver bullet. It's not the panacea for all of your cost-saving or computer-based problems. And I was inspired by Shakespeare when I constructed this on my board in my office. To RPA or not to RPA, that is the question. And what I constructed for myself was just a thought process around, do I know whether RPA is a potential solution to the business problem? So if it's computer-based, if it's structured data, I start thinking yes, and then there's a lot more nuanced questions that go behind that. Do I actually understand what the business problem is probably more fundamental. And then I think to myself, are there other potential solutions to the business problem? So if I'm building RPA on top of an ERP, should I actually push that back down to the ERP and see if there's an upgrade available that will actually give me the automation that I need from that? Then I'm going to look at all my options and I'm going to compare them from a number of different parameters that I choose. Net benefits, speed to realise, etc. And then I'll select based on preferences A to E. But there is a small deviation to this, which is, but what happens if I discover that an ERP upgrade is the path? And then in conversations with my colleagues and digital technology department, they tell me that's 3 years away. Then I might come back to RPA, because I might be able to implement RPA as an interim solution. But then I introduce a whole new problem as well, which is if I've got an interim solution, does the business case for the ERP drop away? So there's a whole bunch of stuff to think about, or at least stuff that I think about with RPA and extending it. And this again is another thing that I think caught us out a little bit. So if I think about what happens when you introduced RPA, we got rid of hours of work in the business. And we introduced new support work for RPA, and we got a net benefit for the business as a whole. But let's just examine that business hours a bit more closely, because yes, we've got rid of production effort, but we also got rid of management overhead, because if you've got less people, there's no performance appraisals, there's no objective setting, there's no recruitment, there's no training. That management overhead has gone. But it has arisen somewhere else, because you're now having to manage your bots. They do require training, they do require remediation, they do require looking after. And so the management overhead has moved, as well as the effort has moved to automation. You still got your net benefit, but it's just important to make sure that you factor all those things in. And those of you who know Lean, this is Timwood, which is the 8 forms of waste that exist per the Lean philosophy. We saw unintended positive benefits from RPA. So we got some negatives, we got some lessons learned. We also got some good things. Waiting was something that we are now addressing, because we can see that through the process metrics that RPA gives you, you can see how long it takes to actually take something from start to end. Not as easy to see sometimes in an ERP or a CRM, but we can see it very clearly because the bots keep reprocessing. So we get that signal. And we can now see where the pinch points are in the chain, where are the weak points. And if there's a cost behind the wait time, you can potentially reduce that cost. And that's what we're doing. We're able to target it to specific areas. And in terms of overprocessing, some of the information that we collect in the healthcare industry or in our hospital group is that we collect information which is free text. And some people use that free text field liberally to include everything like "have a nice day," this is ready to be billed, or even to include a long dialogue with the doctor on the billing comments. But what that does then is that actually means that a human caregiver has to go and read those comments, and it can't be processed. Whereas if we can convince the people not to use that as a free text field for whatever things they want to include, then it will go straight through for processing, and we end up raising the bill quicker than we would otherwise do. And of course, RPA is always going to hit skills, because what you're doing is you're giving people more meaningful work and taking away the stuff that actually doesn't really require these massive brains that we've got been blessed with, or at least maybe some of you have. And then the final piece, I think, or maybe the second to last slide, is this bit. This is just thoughts about the op model and role changes, because in this very simplistic model of 4 teams, finance, HR, operations, and we've got this number of people, so each box represents an individual in that stream. And in the post-RPA state, we've seen 7 people are no longer required. But actually, if you can see this colour, you can't see it very well, D6 to 8, they're new employees. So we've got to think about what are their PDs and how do you cope with things like BCP, and what actually are they going to do, because their jobs are now created in a different space. You've still got your net benefit, but you've created them a different team. And that, of course, means that you've changed all of those managers' jobs, because they've now got less people that report to them. For some industries, this might mean that people have dropped a pay grade because they're based upon how many people they have working for them. So there's nuances to this kind of change, which isn't just about reducing hours and everybody skips happily into the distance. There's a lot of thinking needs to be done around the operating model changes that occur as a result of introducing RPA. So I've talked about the journey to date for St John of God, managing the digital workforce, growing the digital workforce, and some of my musings for growing successfully. I didn't get any questions yet, but there might be some later. And I'd summarise by saying that we think that the project delivered benefits and insights for future projects, which is good, because those are the 2 benefits you get from any project, hopefully. We have succeeded with RPA, but it's required more than just time saved from the business to be proven to have succeeded. It's a very confronting change, and don't underestimate it, is kind of the watchwords I have. And a hybrid workforce may require a lot more change than you've thought about when you wrote your project mandate 2 years before you get to this kind of point. Thank you.